to the 9th Annual Art Talks and Lecture Series at Rio Bravo. This is the last and concluding talk for this season. And I want to introduce to you John Johanek.
Being the last talk of the season, I think the best thing is to start with a thank you to the Sierra County Arts Council for putting these together. And 4 of our members here who are instrumental in pulling this all together. Rebecca Speaks, Sydney Wilkes, Stacy Blumhay, and Christine Houghton. I'm just here. And I want to thank you all for coming here. I know you had other options. I know you could be at the big tent church revival right now. So thank you for coming here. My session today is going to be what I've learned in my 40 years of publishing and magazine design primarily. And when I got out of college, I had no idea I was going to end up with a career in magazines. In fact, when I graduated, I wanted to be an illustrator. And that was a tough nut to crack at the time. I tried hard and I ended up getting a job as an art director for an ad agency in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was frustrated. The title art director was a misnomer. I spent more time as director than art, and I was doing a lot of customer management and design work overview rather than actual design work, and I got frustrated. I'm going to give you a little background on my history because it leads up to how I got to what I do.
Yeah.
And so to scratch my itch to be an illustrator, I started doing freelance work. And one of the clients I ended up with was a magazine that had just started up, a couple years old. It was called Wisconsin Sportsman. And it was, most magazines have maybe a staff of 10 or 12 people, and this had a staff of 2. There was a business manager and the editor, who was also the publisher, who also designed the magazine. And it was more than just hunting and fishing. They got into history and environmental things. So they thought it would be a good idea to have an illustrator do some illustrations, and because I really hadn't established the style, I could do 3 or 4 different styles for 3 or 4 different articles and bring them in, and it looked like 3 or 4 different illustrators had done art in that issue. And after a couple of issues, the editor said, well, instead of just bringing the art in and showing me what you're planning with this, why don't you mock it up, cut out like headlines and text from the back issue and show me how this would fit on the page. So I started bringing in the art kind of laid out, and I knew the editor wanted to be the editor and publisher and that, and last thing he wanted to do was design the magazine. And I said to him, you know, this is kind of fun, I rather enjoyed it. If you ever decide you want to hire an art director, let me know. And about 2 weeks later, he took me up on the offer, and so I became the art director and I started designing the magazine. And once I did that, I never did any artwork again. And the magazine company grew. They added a second and a third magazine. They started doing book publishing. They started an art gallery. All the covers were wildlife art. We started doing limited edition prints. I was doing the advertising and promotion and subscription form. I was just doing a ton of work. And after about 6 years, I thought, crap, for all the work I'm doing, I could be working on a national magazine. So I applied for a job in Pennsylvania with Rodale Press. And at the time, they were publishing magazines like Organic Gardening and Prevention Magazine and Bicycling, all health-oriented. And I was hired because they were starting up a new magazine called New Shelter. And it dealt with the new trend in alternative energy, wind power, solar power, earth-burned homes, things like that. So I started there, and that went along fine for about 4 years, and I had a falling out with the publisher, and I found myself looking for a new job, and I ended up getting hired by Popular Mechanics magazine in New York. and I decided to continue living in Pennsylvania, and I commuted to New York every day, which was a round trip through New Jersey. It was a couple of hours commute each day. And it was while I was at New Shelter magazine, and I had been working, I thought, pretty hard and creating some really nice designs and things. And if you're at all familiar with publishing or any aspect of print for that matter, there are all sorts of competitions you can enter your work in to see, to get an evaluation of what you're doing. And so this magazine at Rodale Press, they have budgets for that sort of thing. So I was sending in my artwork to these design competitions, and I wasn't winning anything, and it was kind of demoralizing. And I thought, well, what am I doing wrong? And you get the results, and there's first, second, and third. Well, did I finish fourth, or was I down here at number 26? You didn't know. So I decided there are these design annuals that would come out every year. Print magazine would put them out. It was the best of, and they would have the best of everything. And they had sections on magazines, the best covers, the best two-page spread, the best use of photography, the best use of illustration. So I started looking at those. There's another one called CA, Communication Arts. They would put one out. And I studied and studied, and I thought, what are they doing that I'm not doing? And I started noticing a pattern of the ones that were winning. And I noticed there were certain aspects of the design that kept popping up. And I found that the second, third honorable mentions usually had one of these 4 points that were working. And the blue ribbon winners, the best to show, they seemed to have all 4 of these things working. About the time I left New Shelter and went to Popular Mechanics, that's when I had the chance to really apply my thinking. And I started using the 4 points in the back of my mind when I did design, when I evaluated what I was doing, and entering more competitions there. And I started winning. And I started winning the nice prizes with the reputable awards outfits, and I knew I was onto something. Well, after about 4 years at Popular Mechanics, a friend of mine from back in Rodale Press, he and I, it turned out we're both freelancing for the same guy. One thing led to another. We merged, and we decided to start our own magazine design consulting firm called Publication Design. And the idea was, I was still working at Popular Mechanics. He had lost his job at Rodale Press. So the plan was, Bob was going to get the thing up and running, and hopefully in 6 months it would be at a stage where I could quit my job at Popular Mechanics, and we could proceed with our plan. And we started in February, and I was going to work through the middle of summer. Well, after 1 month, we were so busy that I quit my job. We started the business, and it took off from there. And we've employed this design approach that I've established that worked for me, and it worked for magazines, but I found it works for a lot of other stuff. Any form of print, it seems to work. And in fact, when I was commuting from Pennsylvania to New York, there was a billboard that struck me, and I'll touch on that at the very end. Advertising, magazine design, brochures, whatever you're designing in print, I think these 4 points work. So we developed what we called a 4-point approach to award-winning design. And when I left Popular Mechanics, we wanted to establish ourselves as a design firm that was not just local or regional. We were all over the country. So we did a lot of aggressive marketing of ourselves, and it wasn't long before we were doing seminars and workshops ourselves for the trade magazines that are in the magazine business. There's a number of them. There are some good ones, and they produce magazines themselves. I found before long I was writing articles on design. We were doing seminars and workshops on design, and one of the best magazine associations held annual conferences. They invited us to be speakers for their conferences. And they also had their own design competitions, and instead of entering stuff, we were judging stuff. And we had a very good reputation. So I've used this design philosophy, if you will, to guide everything I've done design-wise, including once I got out of it and started doing my own design work and paintings for the gallery. So the program we produced was called A Four-Point Approach to Award-Winning Design, and it got down to 4 simple points. And this seminar, I've pared it down for this because it's normally about a 3-hour seminar, so I hope I've pared it down enough. But I found that not only did it help me determine what good design was, it helped when I couldn't figure out what my supervisor wanted. Anybody who's worked in design, you have to get an okay from someone, an editor, a publisher, a client. And so often it's so frustrating for designers, because I know firsthand, you bring something in that you think this is it, and they look at it and they say, nah, it's not quite what I'm looking for. And they can't pinpoint the problem, they just want you to try again. Well, I found, usually it's one of these 4 points that isn't working, maybe it's several of those 4 points. So I've used it to help communicate with other designers or with publishers. What is it that isn't striking you right about this? I've also used it to evaluate other design. And a large part, when we had our design firm, we did a lot of magazine startups where people who had an idea for a magazine would come to us and say, I have a magazine idea, I don't have a clue how to go about getting it in print. Or someone with an established magazine that's been around a while and needs to freshen it up would have us redesign it. And some were so small they couldn't afford a staff to design the magazine, they would come to us to produce it. But I also did a lot of critiques, a lot. And magazines would send me a year's worth of publications, and I would go through them and give them a very thorough report. Here's what's wrong, here's what's right, and I wouldn't change this, but here's what you need to fix. And in the course of doing that, I've looked at a lot of magazines to the point where I can't read a magazine anymore. And when I can't. And in the business, I traveled a lot, and I would get on the plane, pick up the in-flight magazine, and I would have to critique it. Why did they use that color? Why did they pick that font? Why did they crop it like this? So it became a curse, but that's my life. So when people would come to me and say, well, I've got this idea for a magazine, I had 2 questions for them, because the design of a magazine is based on its purpose, and different publications send different messages. So I would always ask them, why are people buying or reading your magazine? What do they want out of your magazine? Because it always comes down to just 2 things. Anybody want to take a guess? 2 things. The only reason people buy magazines, look at magazines, subscribe to magazines.
Information.
Information.
Entertainment.
Bingo, you hit both of them. Information and entertainment. There we go. And, yep.
Were you guys planted?
Now the reason this is important is because if you know what your readers are going for, you need to design to meet that need. You can't have an information-oriented publication and be really playful. And you can't plan a playful magazine and have it look like the Bible. You know, the design has to reflect the content. And the problem is some designers don't know what they're doing, and they'll create a design, and you'll look at the magazine, and you'll get the wrong impression of what that magazine is supposed to be. Now this is obviously an information-oriented magazine. This is actually the front cover. By the way, all the things I'm going to show you here are not my work. This isn't about my work, it's about design. So we're looking at other people's publications, and the good part is I can speculate a lot on what the thinking was. But this is clearly designed to be an information-oriented publication. And this one as well. It's another step up. They're trying to be a little bit more entertaining. And the important thing is to determine what's the ratio of your magazine. Are you 50-50? Are you leaning a lot more toward entertainment, a lot less information? And I think of the old, remember when we had phone books? The phone book was an information publication. Contrast that with Mad Magazine, clearly an entertainment publication. Two very different designs. Here's obviously an entertainment-oriented magazine. Now, a lot of these slides are like 15, 20 years old, but they still make the points. But they are not making this easy to read. And clearly entertainment, very playful, not much information on the cover, no cell lines, just graphics. And by the way, I have found that there isn't a category in the country that doesn't have a magazine for it. And it would always surprise me if people would come in and say, I need to redesign my magazine, and it would be some obscure thing. And I think, really, there's a magazine for that? And then I find out they have two competitors. You know? So, yeah, there's Juggle Magazine, if you're into juggling. Most magazines are trying to be a combination of both, and this is one way to solve it. They've got a very entertaining graphic, tells you nothing about what the magazine's about, but it also kind of has a table of contents listed on the front. Oops. And this is getting closer to a traditional magazine with some cover lines and an interesting graphic. Whoops, gave you the answer. Yeah. There's about 14,000 magazines in the country. And if you go to a good newsstand, Barnes & Noble, something like that, you're going to see about 500 titles, 500 different titles. If you go to a decent supermarket and they have a newsstand, or an airport, you might see 100 different titles. If you go to Davis Fleck, you'll see 7. And one of them is the artist directory. Out of those 14,000 magazines, a vast majority are specialty magazines or association magazines. If you have a trade or a craft or a specialty, there's a magazine for it. And out of those 14,000, you probably will never in your life see 12,000 or 13,000 of them because they're so specialized.
But you have.
I've seen a lot of them. And every year, about 400 new magazines get created and get distributed for various reasons. But at the same time, there's about 400 that bite the dust every year. They just go away. And my question was going to be, why do you think they succeed or fail? It comes down to one of these two things. It's either the concept or the execution. And when people came to me with a magazine idea, my first question was, is it a good concept? And that was up to them to determine, yes, we need this magazine. It's a good concept, it's going to sell. And so then my situation was, then we need to make sure the execution is good. Because if you have a good idea and you don't pull it off, it ain't gonna work. And I don't care how good the design is, if it's a bad idea, that's not gonna work either. You want a good concept with a good execution, and the worst thing you can have is a bad concept and bad execution. You guaranteed failure. This plays out in everything I can think of in life, and some of the best examples I see is every Sunday when I'm watching football, and they talk about, oh, they had such a great game plan. Well, it's a good concept. They had a good concept. They decided they're going to run the ball instead of pass. You know, first half they passed 20 times and ran 10 times. That was the concept. Did it work? Oh, the pass rush got into the passer. Well, that's execution. Well, he completed 15 out of 19 in the first half. That's execution. His receivers have been dropping the balls all day. They're on target, but they aren't. That's execution. You need both. And the teams that have good concepts, good game plans, good execution, they're going to succeed. And the same with magazines, the same with design. And my feeling is, I don't care if you're designing a newspaper ad or a brochure or a flyer, whatever you're designing, or a magazine, you need a good concept and a good execution. Here's a few, I'm going to just talk about the concept and execution as I view it here. For one thing, it's a law magazine. They decide to put a pie on the cover, which, you know, you have these really boring topics to deal with. And as a designer, you want to make them interesting. And I think this is probably a decent concept. Let's do a pie. I mean, obviously they're playing off this title, How Big a Slice? Here's what I don't like about this cover and why I don't think it's as good as it could be. It's not that bad, but it could be a lot better. It bothers me that, for starters, they use this pea green color for the background. It's just a sickly, sickly color. It doesn't enhance the pie at all. It bothers me that the pie, in this case, has so much dead space around it. I don't really need to see this shadow over here, and I don't need this space. They could have run this pie right out to the edge, would have made a bigger presence on the cover, and by doing so, it would have come up here and they could have popped a little bit over the logo and it would have brought it forward. I also think this color choice for the logo was a very sickly color. Now, I don't know if they did this or not, but if I were doing this cover and this was the concept and this were the headline, I would have at least tried to get shots that had someone cutting a slice of the pie. And I would have had shots cutting, I would have done this first, preserve the pie, get that shot, but then take a knife, get some shots cutting it, get some shots lifting it out, get a variety of shots. And maybe they did, and maybe it just fell apart when they did that. Maybe, I get the feeling they were so proud of the way this turned out, they couldn't bear to cut it. So, I think that could have been done better. Running Times magazine. Once again, here are some things that bother me about it. There's another hidden rule we have that's called pick a color for the logo that's in the image, and then don't use that color anywhere else in the cover for type. And what they've done here, unfortunately, is pick the prominent color, and then they've used it here and here and here. So, and they've got two separate images of it here. So your eye is bouncing around, the color is taking you all over the place. You don't know what to look at. And this is as dominant as this. So it's a very cluttered looking cover that it's not controlling the reader's eye. So if they'd have done just the logo in color and these in different color, it would have a whole different character. It bothers me that they could have cropped this much tighter. I don't need to see all of this here. And what really bothers me, it's a magazine about running. What's one of the most important things about running? The feet. And they've cropped the feet off. And I realize that's in the photo. They're coming up over a hill, I guess. But if you're gonna do that, well then just crop it here. Crop it there and make the whole thing bigger. And these guys, their heads would be up here popping up and it would have a much stronger presence on the cover. One thing to keep in mind though that's good about this cover, they always say in newsstands, magazines, numbers sell. So when you can work a number in, it's always a selling point, even if it's the 5 best and the 2 best. So I think this cover could have been much better with some better cropping and color usage. This one I absolutely hate. Never, I don't care what you're designing, don't put type sideways. The whole point of publications is readability. You want to make it readable. And anything that forces you to turn your head or rotate the publication, you don't want that. I mean, it just drives me nuts. And yes, I realize they've got this long logo, and gosh, if we put it up here, it'll have to be so much smaller. Well, condense the type or do something else. I've, in 40 years, never run type sideways. I don't like seeing it run sideways. And the same goes with stacked letters. And the only thing that works stacking letters to make a word is the word bar, B-A-R. Otherwise, just don't do it. It even bothers me every time I drive down Main and see El Cortez. It's just, I'm sorry, it's stacked letters. They could have designed that sign with it in one line, but that's me. And I don't know if you can even see it, but hidden back here is a huge letter A, yellow, and I don't know why that's even there. But this is just a terrible composition. But don't ever run type sideways. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna say it. There's an ad in the artist directory where they have run the whole ad sideways. It was probably designed to be a 2-page spread. They put it on 1 page and it's rotated. I won't say what brewery it's for, but this is Utah Homes and Gardens. Homes and Garden. There are some fine things they do, but this was just. I speculate here that this was a case where the editor or the publisher saw this photo, which is a really nice photo, and said, I want to use that on the cover. And the art director said, yeah, but where are we going to put the logo? And the editor said, I don't care, make it work. And this was their solution. And whenever you put type on top of something, it sends it back and it says it's less important. And they're making this really unimportant when I'm sure the image, you know, without the type was a beautiful image, but now the flowers become the focal point because there's no type on top of it. Everything else is pushed back. And this little peekaboo treatment just doesn't work for me. Just as an aside as well, usually when you put things on covers like this that have borders, like this is, up here the border was not, it was not shot straight on, so the top border is coming across at an angle. That's just a detail that's distracting to people like me that overanalyze magazines. And this, I think the concept was the flaw here. They clearly wanted to tie in the idea of golfing, going to golfing destinations. You're a pilot, you can fly anywhere you want, you can go golf. I see what they're trying to say. They've got the aviation aspect here, but I'm not sure what they're doing. It almost looks like there's a body on a gurney there. I'm not sure. And then the golf courses could be anywhere. I would have rather seen a photo of a cockpit with the top end of a bag of golf clubs sitting in there. That would have said everything they needed to say. It's obviously an airplane cockpit. It's obviously they're going golfing. You don't need this. You don't need this. The other thing that bothers me about this shape here and the treatment of it, makes me think of Glinda the Good Witch and the Wizard of Oz flying in on that bubble or Munchkin Land. It's just I don't know why it's treated that way. And here's another thing that bugged the hell out of me. This headline is 5 words. They used 4 different colors for that headline. That's 1 would have been enough. 1 good color. And right now this is competing with this for importance. I'll throw out one of my other favorite tidbits of advice because this is a good example of violating it. There are 3 ways you can make something important on a cover or on a page. Size, color, and position. And if you think of a page of just solid text, like you're reading a book and you turn the page, what's the first thing you're going to look at? The upper left corner, the first word on the upper left corner. It's the position. You've got nothing else to draw your eye. If you take a word in the middle of that page and put it in red, and you turn the page and see that, your eye's going to go right to that red word. And if you take any word on that page and just blow it up and make it a little larger, put it in bold type, that's going to draw your eye. Size, color, and position. And what you've got here is two of the elements, color and position, competing with color and size. So they're actually fighting each other. So those are some of the basics going into what will be the 4 points that I want to get into. So here's the 4-point approach, and these are simple. It's 4 words. They all begin with the letter S, and it's helped me remember for 40 years, and even in my old age, I still remember them. First word is simplicity. And when I was looking at all these designs, I saw a lot of the winners had very simple designs. And these are examples of publications, mainly covers, that just very simple. They didn't go crazy with color, with the type, and the image sends a message. This is all they needed. Here's taking it a little farther. This is an in-flight magazine for SkyWest magazine. There's a little bit more color in the image, and they used those colors in the typography. And so there's a nice balance of color, and they didn't clutter the image up. You can still see that sunset. Very simple approach and very simple fonts. This one, if you took that yellow box and all this type off here, you've got a black and white photo. It's a pretty simple image. It bothers me a bit that the guy is looking off to the right. I'd rather he be looking to the left. Sometimes you can flop images and create that, but with people you generally don't do that. If it's an image with, say, a bicycle in it, you know, the chain drive ends up on the wrong side. One of my clients was Birdwatcher's Digest magazine. We'd have photos of a lot of birds, and birds are great pointers. All images point one way or another, and birds especially, their beaks point this way or that. And if you wanted it to point in the opposite direction, you just flop the photo, the bird didn't look any different. It was kind of cool to do it that way. But it's a nice, clean approach to the cover. I'm not saying it's a great cover, but it's certainly a simple cover. And when the word simple is in the title of your magazine, you should have a simple design. I think this is very clean and straightforward. Nothing fancy about it. And a lot of times I've seen magazines where they've had an image like this that's very monochromatic, and they feel, oh, I gotta jazz up the cover, I gotta put some color in here, and they'll go crazy with type to make it more exciting, and all that did is detract from the image itself and cause visual conflicts elsewhere on the cover. So here they've tastefully stuck with black and white type, picking up on the black and white in the photo, and it's very clean and very simple. Even though it's a very complex cover with the typography, it's a very simple design. Second element is strength. And there are a couple of my pieces in this one. The rest of these are others, but I'll point them out when we get to them. At Popular Mechanics, that was like the key thing. It had to be a macho magazine. And we worked real hard to use the strength element. You might call it punch or power or other words for it, but it's one thing that I've seen in a lot of magazine designs. This one is, those are all very macho looking fonts. They're big, they're bold, they fill the cover, and I think it's an interesting contrast that the image itself is in black and white and all the color is in the typography. But it's got a lot of strength to it. It's a very strong cover. At Popular Mechanics, the high impact colors we stuck with on the cover were red, black, white, and gold. And usually those 4 colors satisfied all our color needs, and they were strong colors. The interesting thing about this one, they've cropped the vehicle itself very tight so the focus is on this guy, but the strength elements they've used, this guy's popping up over the logo, this whole thing is popping up over the logo, and the thing that tells me they really want to emphasize power and action every single font on this cover is in italic, everything. So they're looking for a lot of movement throughout the cover. It's not just men's magazines that can capitalize on using strength. This is geared toward women. The logo is huge. In fact, I'm not even sure why this is so big. It's bigger than some of the cover lines. I don't think September's that important. But they've got a large image, high impact colors for the most part, and very well focused. And the logo is about as big as you can get it on the cover without trimming off. Another guy's magazine, and I speculate that this photo was not shot at that angle. I think this was a more traditional shot. They did a lot of airbrushing and rotated the photo. You know, I've looked at this sideways a number of times, and it looks like they've really exaggerated the action to be going up ahead. And then to compensate for the fact that they didn't use any italic type, they rotated the type to give it movement here and here. So you get the action going even though it's not italic type. But this is a good example of really letting the logo stand off by itself from the other type. I know they've used it down here, but it's very small. This is one that I did from Popular Mechanics. And again, it just, the photo itself had inherently had a lot of action to it. And you could tell that the boat is zooming at an angle, and it's the boat that's tilted, not the photo, because the horizon line here is still horizontal, so the photo was not tilted. The action was there. So then we created the font with some tapering to give it some movement, and ordinarily I would not put this much type in reverse on a page, but I wanted this to be as close to the boat as possible without touching it, so that you really get the feeling the boat is smashing through the type on the page, and it's creating that motion. And this is a cover I did of Popular Mechanics. And again, it has the high impact colors, red, black, yellow, and blue, gold and blue. And plane itself is popping up over the logo, so that brings the plane forward. And then the little rocket down here is popping up over this type, so that brings that even farther forward. So there's different levels of action going from front to back. The third element is what I call sizzle. If you've ever been in advertising, you've probably heard the term selling the sizzle rather than the steak. And you'll see this in advertising a lot. And a current example is there's a commercial on TV right now, TV commercial for coffee, and it shows the plantation workers picking the beans out in the field. There's not even a voiceover. They're picking the beans, and the next thing you see that it's going through the machine to clean the beans, and then the beans are going into the roaster, and then they're out of the roaster, they're in the grinder, and pretty soon they're in the percolator, and you see the underside, there's coffee dripping out the bottom, and you're about 90% way through the commercial, you still don't know who it's for, and then at the end the Starbucks logo comes up. Well, they're not selling the coffee as much as the fact that this is a quality product. We do a lot of work selling all the backstory behind it. And it reminds me of an earlier commercial for Hills Brothers Coffee, where they showed a couple out in the nature in the morning. Obviously a frosty morning, and they're out bird watching, and one has binoculars and one has a camera, and they're looking, and one says, "Oh, look, there's a red-winged blackbird." It's like, well, so they, oh wow, and they snap photos and whatnot, and oh, it was a great morning out, and they come in the house, and then they drink their coffee, and it kind of ends there. 90% of the commercial is them out there enjoying nature. What they were selling was the satisfaction of having coffee after a cool morning, and it's good to the last drop. That's selling the sizzle, not the steak. So here's some examples of sizzle. The magazine is called Trailer Life. And I want you to look at the cover and see how small the percentage is of the cover that's taken up by an actual trailer. And you don't even see the brand of the trailer. There's just, that's it. That's the whole part of the cover for Trailer Life. The rest of it is all sizzle. It's the guy out here enjoying his coffee, I guess. The truck parked in front. There's even the tire tracks in the dirt. There's the scenery, the golden hour lighting, all this mood stuff. All the stuff that says, I would like to be there. I'd like to be doing that. The trailer is secondary. And you'll see this a lot of times in combination with any subject, often subjects that don't have a lot of interest otherwise. They need to create a mood for it. You can create sizzle with color a lot. There are colors and color combinations that tell you things like red and green for the Christmas season. Here they're talking about the holiday gifts. They're talking about holiday goodies. Even the cowboy is wearing a red jacket. They're out in the snow. So they accentuated all those aspects of this being their Christmas issue by using red and green combinations throughout. Well, it's interesting that red and green also work if you're talking about Mexico and the Mexican flag. The thing that strikes me about this two-page spread is that the article itself is about a restaurant, and these are the owners. Just about all the other graphics in here are sizzle elements. You've got a plate of chips here. They're there for visual effect. There's no caption, no information related to that. Up here, you've got a string of chili peppers just for decoration. Here you've got some sombreros, no information, just decoration. Of course, the red and green for Mexico. Even in the main photo, here's chili peppers in the foreground. Got some Mexican blankets back here. All this stuff is sizzle. It's giving you the flavor of what this is about. And the interesting thing too is this table setting right here. I don't know if you're familiar with dinnerware. Some of you might recognize this. There's green, yellow, blue, and red. The pattern of that dinnerware is called Fiesta. So they've got this whole color scheme going. And the way I like to judge these things is if this were a foreign magazine in a foreign language and you didn't know what it was about, could you tell what the story was about just from the visuals? And in this case you can, I think. Now, if the title of your magazine is Hot Boat, I think the magazine image needs to be a hot boat. This is a hot boat. I will only speculate. I wouldn't be surprised if this whole background that's black was photoshopped. There might have been blue with waves or something, and they've knocked all that back so they could put the type in here, but they had to leave this in so you get the action, the motion going. And if the boat itself wasn't hot enough, you got to put a couple of hot chicks in there, make it all hotter. This one drives me nuts because I don't know what they were thinking. I would love to talk to this editor and this designer because, generally you want a positive image for your cover. This is a magazine for outerwear, obviously, and this was their special issue on something about tweeds, I saw, English-inspired tweeds. But when I look at this image, it seems to me they are either coming from or going to a funeral. Seriously, she is in the worst mood ever. Just buried grandma, and he's wondering, what's on his to-do list for next week, I guess, just out of it. I think she's even got a handkerchief here in her hand. So then they did the whole thing in these gray tones, which is dreary as hell. And then the logo is a dead color. And it just sends such a negative message to me. And I don't think they wanted that. Why would you want a negative message? And this is where, if you don't realize what you're doing with color, it can send the wrong message, I think. So I think they really misunderstood. This is concept and execution. It was a bad concept to start with. Why show this? They're in the back of a car, headed to the cemetery. I know they are. And there's nothing uplifting about that. So the idea that that's what they were going to put on the cover is just a bad idea. And then they just took all the life out of it with the colors as well. It's just a huge mistake. I hate this cover. And I'm sure they would think, well, this is a really nice photo. Let's send it in and win a blue ribbon. Not if I'm judging. So the fourth element is what I call sophistication. And this is about the hardest of the four to incorporate into design, because if you're doing it right, the reader's not really going to notice that you've put this element in there. It's a very subtle thing. Not so subtle in this case, though. I think that this was neat. The whole thing is very monochromatic, and then they just put the lips in red. I like that they did that. I'm sure the whole photo was color, and yeah, I just like it. And they didn't go crazy with type here. They kept all the type off the model. I think it's a very sophisticated looking design. Something similar here with this, except the color they've used here, I don't know where it comes from. Maybe somewhere in his head here, you could find that color. There's a feature in design where you can click on a spot and say, I want that color in my color palette. I think they must have done that. It's very compatible, and I like that they did that instead of making it some strong color. And here you can see the effect of having one set of type in a color that's nowhere else on the cover. They've got it down here, but it's small. But it really sets that off. They overlapped his head a little bit, and they put a cast shadow, very light shadow on the letter N. And same up here, there's a very subtle shadow going up there. It's subtle things that just add to the overall feel of it, and I think it's an excellent job. This one is less obvious, and I'm not even sure that this was intentional. I'm giving them the credit that it is. But this looks like 6 photos just side by side, but they did something interesting here. If you look at these intersections, they're not just a line. It's not 3 and 3. They've got the points of these two connecting. And what they've done by doing that is connected this image with blue, blue, and blue. Whether that was intentional or not, I'm not sure. And then these 3, it turns out, are food, food, and food. And I'm not sure if that was intentional or not. But they also did not bring this photo all the way down to align with these. So the suggestion of a white border around all 4 signs is still there. What I'm not sure about, if they really intended this or not, is that it bothers me that at the bottom of the page here, the text here does not align. It looks like there's a line missing. This column should have been a line longer, and it would have been uniform. And they hung this graphic way down here, down to the folio line, near the trim, when they actually had all this space up here. And they actually could have kicked it up and knocked the whole line back and had that line there that should be there. And there's some vertical alignment issues that aren't quite right, which makes me wonder. But like I said, I'll give them credit, the benefit of the doubt that this was intentional, because most magazines wouldn't do that. That's a subtle thing. You don't want the reader to say, wow, aren't they clever the way they did that? That's not the idea. Just this, this treatment, the clever way to treat it. It's about the only thing that I think is sophisticated on the cover, but this one has a lot going on. It looks very simplistic, but I want to point out a few things. usually when you're designing something and you have a window of type, your alignment is limited by the size of the box, and that's what establishes your left and right margins. Well, here, they've taken this line of type and it aligns with the edge of the T rather than the tip of the T, and up here it aligns with the edge of the T. So the tip of the T sticks out, the edge of the A sticks out, the edge of the T sticks out. It looks like it's in alignment because you got complete vertical, but that's kind of clever. And then the A, the width of the A base is the same width as the top of the T. It sits on there perfectly. The alignment, vertical alignment between the R and the P and the H, that's not accidental, they planned that. Same with over here, the E and the P alignment. And then they did the same thing on this side where the text comes down and it aligns with the edge of the T, not the end of the T. But you don't think of it as sticking out, it looks like it all aligns. The same down here, it all aligns. Then they letter space this stuff out down here, the byline and the photo credit, so that you end up with a complete box of type. And I like the way that they used the color to separate the three words so that they could actually touch these words to one another. That's all very subtle stuff. It's not accidental. And I notice that when I look at design stuff, that it works. You can't quite see it, but they, for some reason, put these very faint rules down each side of the text. It's just very faint. And I don't know if they wanted to let the reader know, hey, look at what we did, aren't we clever? But they didn't really need to do it. The one thing that bothers me about it is, again, think of the graphics as arrows, and this direction is to the left. If that whole photo would have been on the opposite page, it would have been looking in toward the text rather than away from the text. But other than that, I like what they did here. Well, I think it's cute that they use the eyes in the logo to sort of represent children. And it goes beyond that as far as sophistication, because if you look at the alignment of the I under the L, they're in alignment, this I under the R, even this I lining up with the M, and this little ligature here where they connected the T and the E in their logo. Very subtle, but creative and thought out design. And even this tagline is the same width as these letters. A lot of publications would have started here and gone all the way to the Y. They made it the same width as those elements. So there's a lot of subtle design sophistication. I just want you to notice the face on this little girl, because I'm going to show you another image with a little girl's face on the cover. And this is pleasant, but the next one they really worked on doing all the right things. Because the next set of slides I'm going to show you are trying to get all four of these elements in one cover. And I've emphasized the 4 points on each of these sets. But now that's a powerful cover. And what they've done is gone into her eyes and retouched all the tone out of them, so they're pure white eyeballs. And that makes the eyes really penetrating, and I'd be willing to bet they even went into these highlights and made them a little whiter to get that real direct contact. Another rule of thumb in magazine design is if you put a person on the cover, they should be making eye contact with the reader. And this one does a much better job than that last one. It bothers me a little bit that they've used the logo color elsewhere, but they've got a very strong logo, even to the point where they chop the top off and it still reads quite well. And for something as gentle as the subject of children, I think that's a bold statement for a logo. This is that magazine that had the face peeking through the letter D. This is a much more effective use of it. For all the type that's on here, none of it is on top of any of the flowers, so the flowers really become the stars. Now, it's a very simple cover. There's the flowers and some type. Here's a case where they picked a color for the logo, color out of the arrangement here. They didn't use that anywhere else for type. And the real sophisticated thing here is the way they connected these two sets of lines. Each yellow line has a descender at the beginning, and they managed to let that hang down in front of the all cap portion below it. So they get a real tight spacing and really connect those words together. That's, again, a very subtle thing. I don't want the reader to say, wow, aren't they clever? No, it's just, that's why it works. This is about as simple as you can get for subject matter. And this goes back to what I said about stripping all the type off. Can you tell what this magazine's about? Yeah, I think so. Again, too much use of the red competing with the logo, but overall, a nice simple cover. They didn't go crazy with fonts, and there's just a few things overlapping the image itself, but he's overlapping the logo, so it really brings him forward. And very simple. Again, the logo is the only color, only type in that color. And then I think we're probably picking up some of the color in here, and the rest of it is pretty clean and straightforward. So how does that apply to anybody else's art besides, if you don't do a magazine, what else is there? There's ads, there's brochures, there's your business card, there's flyers, or anything else you design. These design principles apply. I've designed flyers and brochures and all those things, and some catalogs. These are the points I always try to work in and make sure they work. Probably, I'll show you one example of my piece of artwork that I did this past summer. And even though it's not a magazine cover, I'm trying to incorporate the same elements. Strength with one big focal point, one strong color. These are the secondary images. The sophisticated part, I think, is that these two birds, this is on a canvas, and these two birds, all of the black in both of them is done with pen and ink. And I worked and worked and worked until I wore the nubs down on several pens. And I knew that it wasn't going to give me the solid black feel that the bird really has. But by doing so, I knew that it would create almost a gray image, and it would be kind of in the background. As opposed to this bird, I painted this whole thing with black dye. I had some black leather dye. So this is solid black. And the other thing, and this is a little bit of sophistication, I feel, if you're into birds and you want to identify a bird, you're looking for several different things. You're looking for, what does it look like perched? What does it look like flying? What is the wing pattern when it's flying? What is the tail pattern when it's perched? So you've got it open, closed, in flight, sitting. You can see the markings. The other thing I did is the two back birds, the yellow that I added was very washed down, very muted, and that, like the gray sketching, sort of pushes it to the back, makes it the secondary element. So you're prioritizing things for the viewer. I have one more image, and there's a little story with it. And as I said, there was a point when I was working at Popular Mechanics magazine, and I was commuting from eastern Pennsylvania to New York City. And I didn't drive it. There was a commuter bus service, and I could get on the bus, and it would go for 2 hours through New Jersey and drop me off at Port Authority in New York. And there were some days where the weather wasn't good. And there were some days in the winter where it was extremely bad. And we would take Interstate 78 east until we hit Interstate 95 north-south corridor. hang a left on 95, and we would go up past Newark Airport. And that stretch, the interstate, is right adjacent to the runways. You have the runways, a little bit of land, some fencing, and the runways are right there. And one day, I don't know if it was January or February, and I'm commuting in, and it was probably one of those days where I spent more time on the bus than I did at the office that day. And we're sitting in standstill traffic. The roads are terrible. They're icy, there's snow coming down, it's cold, it's crappy. Last thing you wanted to do was be out on the road. Traffic was poking along. And as we're poking along up 95, we pass Newark Airport. And there were many times I saw planes taking off and I thought, I don't know where they're going, but I want to be on that plane. Well, that little strip of land was also prime real estate for billboards. And there was a billboard there, and we're creeping along, so I got a good chance to look at it. I'm sorry I didn't get a photo of it, but it's stuck up here forever. So I've recreated it here. And just imagine yourself sitting on that bus in the worst winter weather you can imagine, and you poke along and you see this billboard. Honest to God, that's it. There wasn't another word on there. And that, for me, underscored my belief that my 4 points were a good idea, because that tells you everything you know. And Chris, you know, you've said, what do you have, 2 seconds to analyze a billboard as you fly by?
It's a one-act play.
Yeah.
2 seconds.
2 seconds. Well, I probably had 2 minutes easily the way we were poking, but it was enough that I remembered. And obviously you can see the 4 points here. This isn't a magazine, but it works. It's simplicity, it's strength, the type is huge, the plane is there, it's got the sizzle. I want to be on that plane, I want to be leaving. And the real sophisticated thing for me was they added a little chunk of stuff to the billboard so that they could include this tail fin up here that actually popped up. It was dimensional. So you really got the feeling this thing was leaving and you wanted to be on it. Now, I can imagine how many designers at ad agencies had to deal with doing a billboard where the client wanted, we're going to Orlando, Tampa, Miami, you know, it's all got to be on the billboard, and we're slashing the price, and it's going to be this, and let's put our website on there, all this other crap, phone numbers, deal, you know, none of that. Florida, you could be there.
Put a QR code, right?
Pardon me?
Put a QR code, right?
Yeah, QR code. Right. So, if it can work for a billboard, I feel my 4 points work for any design. And I use it when I look at my own work. I obviously use it when I look at other people's work. And so that's my story. So if you have any questions, that's my pared down version. I've given this slide program hundreds of times. It's been a lot more extensive than this, and there are other aspects to it that I have gotten into. But by the time I retired from publishing, I had clients in over 40 states and more than a half dozen countries, and I had given this slideshow in Paris and in Bangkok and all over the country. So I've convinced myself, if nothing else, that I know what I'm talking about. And I hope you can take something from here, rather than just hearing my story and how I got to where I am, something that you can take and actually use when you create your own artwork, your own ads, or whatever else you need to do graphically. So if there are any questions, that's Bruce?
With this slide, I have to ask why the landing gear is separated.
I think that's an optical illusion. I think there's a flap there. No, and in fact, the original billboard, I'm pretty sure, was also United Airlines, but it was their old logo with the big letter U, the red and blue U. And I couldn't find a good graphic of it to recreate this billboard. you could overlap this onto their real billboard. This is what it looked like.
Does make me wonder.
All right, thanks for coming.
Thank you.